I shot a charming smile at the muscular man. I stepped forward and raised my right hand to touch his right arm. His left hand was still holding down the elevator button. When he saw me move, the mummy pulled back his left leg and turned slightly to face me. At the same time, Nizan's left foot moved forward. Muscle Man didn't move, so I gave his arm a gentle rub. Since you know that I rarely pay visits, the fact that I'm here today means that there's a reason that I must see your commander. Even if you won't let me see her, I can't just let things slide like this. So, how about this? You tell me a way to meet your commander that doesn't put you in a tight spot. It's better than us resorting to violence, isn't it? After all, if we were to really fight, are you sure that you would win? I tilted my head and gave another pretty smile as I pulled back my hand. Muscle Man was silent a moment, and then he looked to me with bright eyes.
Miss Li Shen, let's do it this way. You and Mr. Nizan return to the 26th floor and wait. I will report to the commander and have her make a decision. What do you think, Miss Li Shen?
I felt somewhat unhappy at this. We were both district commanders, so what was up with the air of arrogance? Fine, I'll be tolerant this time. We're on their turf after all. I truly lacked the air of a commander. Nizan and I were escorted out of the elevator. We stood in front of the elevator doors on the 26th floor, waiting for Muscle Man's return. After the elevator doors closed, I turned to look at Nizan. His carefree appearance seemed to have hit a limit. Perhaps he was tired because it was night, for he swayed slightly as he stood, as if he might fall asleep at any moment. I was about to scold him for being so leisurely while we were in enemy territory, when he suddenly laughed at something behind me. What is it? Was there someone behind me? Even though my mental force wasn't very high, I was still pretty sensitive to my surroundings. Who could have gotten this close to me without my taking notice? I hated feeling weak and feeble. I stubbornly refused to turn around.
There's something I must report to you, but it didn't seem safe to do so on the confines of the Western District, so I followed you and the commander here. I was more than half an hour behind, and only made it past the district line at the last minute, so I was only able to find you now.
This voice sounded very familiar, so I immediately turned around. It was Jiao. Jiao was still dressed in a suit. He stood behind me, looking ever like a perfect gentleman. His black-rimmed glasses didn't block the way as he looked respectfully towards Nizan.
It's me, Commander.
As always, Jiao gave a bow to me. What are you doing here? I asked. Then I turned to Nizan, who didn't look at all surprised. Rather, he nodded to Jiao.
Continue speaking. We're waiting for someone now, so it might not be convenient to talk later.
Jiao understood. He got to his point and said,
I suspect that Miss Laurel didn't really die.
My eyes widened. What do you mean? Jiao looked at me as he said,
As you're aware, Commander, after a person dies, a marketplace worker is assigned to transport the body to the graves beside the border forest. Then, in the real world, that person's heart will stop beating. Only after their body grows cold in that world, will their corpse in this world then disappear.
He paused and adjusted his glasses.
Before that happens though, after a splitting key is inserted into someone's split symbol, they will die in this world, but their appearance remains unchanged. It's in the final moments, before their consciousness truly disappears from here, that they return to their original form. I was suspicious, so I went to the graves to find Miss Laurel's body. And I watched it until it disappeared. However, in the final moments, her body didn't look like Miss Laurel's, but rather someone else. There are two possibilities. 1. Miss Laurel had been maintaining her appearance with her mental force. 2. Someone used their mental force to make themselves look like Miss Laurel, and it was during the time that they were killed.
I frowned. The first scenario was impossible, because Laurel had been young and her condition had been particular when she died in the real world. Mr. Blonde directly entrusted her to me. She hadn't chosen to come to the Western District on her own. Logically speaking, she couldn't have already familiarized herself with mental force before we met to create a new appearance. The second scenario wasn't very likely either though. While it was very easy to disguise yourself as someone else, you couldn't fake a split symbol. Everyone's split symbol gives off a faint light, a glow that we're unable to replicate. If the dead Laurel was a fake, how could we explain the butterfly symbol on her neck? I'd seen her split symbol before, and it was indeed a butterfly. When he saw the doubts on my face, Jiao continued.
Commander, split symbols come in a large number of forms. Everyone's is different, and no symbol is repeated. However, that doesn't preclude the idea that many split symbols may look alike. Even if the symbol on that girl's neck was a butterfly, it may have been a different butterfly to Miss Laurel's. Try to recall it.
At Jiao's words, I suddenly felt that something wasn't quite right, because I'd been so enraged by Laurel's death. I hadn't considered the possibility that someone had disguised themselves as Laurel. I didn't really think much about it at all, but with Jiao's words now, I tried to recall the symbol I saw on the corpse's neck. I have a strong memory, and it really did seem that the butterfly on the corpse wasn't exactly the same as Laurel's butterfly. They looked similar, yes, but they were two different kinds of butterflies. Who would want to disguise themselves as Laurel to get killed? What's the meaning of that, and where's the real Laurel? I grew anxious. If what Jiao supposed was true, that meant there was a chance that Laurel was still alive. Jiao responded,
I don't know the reasons either, but because many recent events have been out of the ordinary, Neizun told me to investigate it secretly. That's when I started to pay more attention to these things.
Neizun told him? I turned to glance at him. Of course. He had the same carefree expression as always, and then he even yawned. I couldn't help but deride myself. Looks like I'm the only one who doesn't concern themselves with what's happening. The elevator suddenly sounded. Must be Muscle Man. I glanced back to the elevator to catch the doors opening, but when I looked back, I found that Jiao had already disappeared. I guess Jiao was staying hidden from the Eastern residents. I turned back to the elevator and pretended that no one but Neizun and I were here. The unsuspecting Muscle Man stood inside the elevator. He said,
Miss Li Shen, our commander is not currently in. I'm not just saying that, but she's really not in the building right now. I didn't know earlier, as she doesn't usually leave the residence at this time, but she's not one to report her activities to me. So, I must apologize, but I'm afraid that you'll have to leave now.
I thought back to what Jiao told us earlier. If what he said was true, it wouldn't be wise to rush in and interrogate Jiao right now. So, I just laughed. Alright, sorry for the troubles. We'll head off then.
There are still 29 hours before daylight returns. Why don't I arrange a place for you and Mr. Neizun to stay?
There's no need. When travelers pass through another district, they can stay in the dorms. At the least, I'm aware of that rule. There's no need for you to inconvenience yourself. You can go. Neizun and I will head to the academy. Muscle Man nodded.
Be careful on your way.
As if not wanting to speak with me for an extended time, he pressed a button to close the elevator doors. It appeared that the man had no intention of seeing Neizun and myself out. My lips twitched. Where's Jiao? I asked Neizun.
On the rooftop, probably.
He yawned again. I couldn't be bothered to respond to this sluggish character. Rather than wait for the elevator, I slipped out the 26th floor window and used my mental force to take me to the 30th floor. Neizun followed behind and jumped up as well. As he'd said, Jiao was indeed standing on the roof, waiting for us. After he spotted my arrival, Jiao immediately proposed.
Commander, I think that it's better if we return to the border forest. Neither you or Neizun are familiar with the way things work here, so I suggest that we wait in the forest. We'll be able to return to the Western District right before day breaks.
I commended Jiao's abilities, and gave no opposition to his suggestion. Neizun suddenly spoke up.
Jiao, you should return to the forest and wait for us there. Li Shen and I are going to take a look at the opposite district line. Before the sky lights up, we'll meet back up with you. If we haven't returned by then, you can head back first. Don't wait for us and proceed as usual.
After listening, Jiao nodded. Then he turned away and seemed to vanish. Neizun smiled lightly. But why are we going to the other district line? I asked with confusion.
I suspect that we'll be able to meet Jiao there.
Why?
It's rare for a commander to be absent from their residence during the night. In such a situation, it was likely that Jiao wasn't currently in the Eastern District at all. If she had traveled to the Western District, it's impossible that neither Jiao or Yuji noticed. So my guess is that she went to the Southern District. If that's the case, why don't we wait for her at the district line?
But if Laurel's not dead, I don't need to find her.
No. Whether Laurel is dead or not, you still have to meet with Jiao.
Nizan said. Why? I asked confusedly.
There haven't just been one or two strange occurrences in the Western District. You've simply remained blind to them. The bugs that covered the body that fell from the academy earlier carried a distinct scent. Just now, I just smelled that scent on the bandaged man we met, which means that Jiao must have had some involvement in the strange things happening in the Western District. Even if you don't plan on interrogating her, you should at least meet with her to see what her reaction is. You must know yourself and your enemy to be victorious in every battle. She's a legendary figure here. And yet, after you became the Western Commander, you never once met with her. Do you think that's alright?
I've never met Silo either. I didn't sound at all confident in my retort. Nizan's senses were stronger than most people's. If he smelled something, then I wasn't going to doubt him.
Silu's an exception. He doesn't like outsiders.
Nizan suddenly laughed.
What? Are you scared? Of Jiao?
Who's scared? Let's go. If we wanted to make it to the other end of the Eastern District, we would have to run for another 15 hours. But since Nizan's words made a lot of sense, I ended up running alongside him, towards the Eastern District's other line. No matter the district, rooftops are the best for traveling. The path was completely devoid of any other people. When we arrived at the border forest, there were still 10 hours left before day. I jumped up onto a tree and rested on a branch, planning to sleep for a bit. I didn't hear anything from Nizan, so I glanced down at the ground. What I saw made me laugh so hard I nearly peed my pants. Nizan was at a tree across from me, exhausting himself as he tried to climb up a tree. While his tall, black-clothed figure didn't appear clumsy as he climbed, he did sort of look like a silly monkey. Monkey knee, do you have enough bananas? Nizan continued to climb diligently, but his voice carried the same carefree quality as before.
This is to conserve my mental force, okay?
Oh please, when the light of day hits tomorrow, our mental force will be replenished.
We're in the Eastern District right now. What if someone tries to ambush us? It's never a bad idea to be a bit cautious.
I laughed at his going to such efforts. Then I put my arms behind my head and looked up at the night sky. It had always just been a whole bunch of darkness, without any stars or lights. There's nothing that illuminates the night here. The only reason we could see at night now was because of our visibility radius in this forest. My visibility radius currently extends about 10 meters round me, which I feel is quite sufficient. If it were pitch black in the real world, forget 10 meters, I wouldn't even be able to see my hands. Despite the fact that in this world, we're stronger than in the real world, I greatly missed living the life of an ordinary person. People have always been like this. We have these expectations of setting ourselves apart. But when we're truly different from everyone else, when he cannot be accepted by them, all we feel is loneliness. It feels asking for normalcy is some kind of extravagant demand. It's a feeling of sadness, and I've always preferred to avoid that sadness. So, I decided to distract myself by starting a conversation with Nizan. I asked quietly, so, what kind of personality defect did you have? While Nizan was alive, he'd suffered from deficient personality disorder, which is said to be a pretty rare disorder. It's because of his unusual illness that he became involved with my second identity. After he and my second identity overlapped, he was forced to remain within 500 meters of me at all times. I'll always remember what Mr. Blonde told me back then.
His name is Nizan. He and you just happen to be complements. It's rare for someone with multiple identities to arrive in split zone number 13, because they have two conscious existences, which makes it less likely that both of those will be caught and brought here. But you were the lucky one in 10,000. Because your second identity resonated with Nizan at some point, your identity overlapped and filled in what Nizan was missing. In other words, someone with too much dropped a bit and was picked up by someone who was missing a bit, thus two complete persons were brought here. Since there was a time difference between your existences, one of you arrived an hour earlier, and one later.
I also remember the scene when Mr. Blonde told me those words. I'd grown very anxious. I pointed at Nizan and asked Mr. Blonde, what you're saying is that my second identity lies within him now?
That's not entirely correct. You can think of it that way, but Nizan is still Nizan, not your second identity. However, because the two of you arrived here as complements of a whole, you two cannot be separated.
For a long time after that, I detested Nizan. Even now, I still hate him, because I suspect that the one who killed the person I loved was now a part of him. It's because of this unusual relationship that the two of us must always remain within 500 meters of the other. Once the distance between us passed 500 meters, neither of us would be able to move if the other didn't follow and cooperate. But this tethering bond between us didn't make me like him anymore. I still hated him, even though I knew that I didn't have any real reasons to. In the end, the person who killed my beloved wasn't him, but me. Maybe I'm just being selfish. I can't hate myself, or rather, the hate I have for myself can never surpass the guilt and pain I feel. So, I chose to hate him. Nizan's quiet voice cut into my thoughts.
You're that interested in my past. You should at least wait until we leave past tonight to ask.
When he said that, I grew alert. I quickly sat up on the branch and reached for the bough on my left shoulder. I looked around, and then I suddenly felt a prickling sensation on my face, like something was sweeping past it. I turned my head up. I couldn't help screaming at the scene above me. There was a woman looking down at me from above my head, and her hair swept across my face. Screaming had just been a subconscious reactional habit that I retained from being alive. I soon calmed down and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There was a woman sitting on a branch above mine, and after I took a good look at her face, I recognized her. That pale, white face and that pair of large, dark, and empty eyes. Unless you had amnesia, you wouldn't forget that face after you saw it once. I steadied myself, and then leaned up against the tree trunk. My left hand was holding my bow, as my right hand held onto the tree. I put some distance between our faces, but she didn't move, her expression blank. With a charming laugh, I said, "Jiao, I am Li Xin." Her soulless eyes suddenly quivered slightly.
What are you doing in the Eastern District?
This was the first time I'd heard her speak. In the past, I'd only seen her from afar, never face to face. Her voice didn't sound at all like I'd expected. It was strange and thick, a bit coarse, but not entirely unpleasant. It had a womanly appeal to it. Suddenly, I couldn't come up with a response, so I ended up saying, "I came to hang out with you, exchange our feelings and the like." Just as I spoke, I heard Nizan's mocking laughter. I couldn't help turning to his tree to send a glare his way, but after I looked that way, I saw three white-robed people. They wore conical hats that hid their faces, as they floated in the air behind Nizan. According to Nizan, floating in the air required 30 mental force. In that case, these people must have had at least 40 mental force, likely more than that. I started to panic a bit, and I couldn't help look to Nizan, but he wasn't looking at me. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the girl above my head. I started winking energetically at him, to signal the danger at his back. No matter the effort I put in though, Nizan's eyes were still glued to the demoness above me. I looked up, and after seeing that Jiao was still looking at me, I turned back to Nizan and continued winking. I'd rather keep winking than look at this frightful woman. Nizan spared me a glance, but he did respond in his carefree tone.
Stop blinking. I'm aware of the three dear friends behind me.
After he said that, I suddenly grew embarrassed. Jiao's rough voice sounded again.
Without my instruction, they won't make a move. Don't be scared.
Who's scared? I couldn't help rolling my eyes. In my head, I was completely aware that those three floating people were the so-called protectors that were never far from Jiao. No one had ever seen their real faces, because they were always wearing those hats. Legend has it that they all look exactly the same because they're triplets, but who knew if that was true? I wasn't sure how strong the three of them were either. In the stories I'd heard, when Jiao was in great danger, her 3 A-rank guards were also present, so these 3 guys hadn't even needed to make a move. From the current situation, it seemed that they weren't weak. My mind suddenly started to calculate the odds of my escaping if a fight were to really start up, but soon, my thoughts moved to another question. What was she doing out in the middle of the night? And didn't this mean that she hadn't gone to the Southern District as Nizan had predicted? As I was considering the different possibilities, Jiao jumped off the tree. When I saw her, I quickly followed and jumped down as well. At the same time, Nizan also left his tree, and the 3 shadows behind him floated down to the ground, still circled around him. Didn't the fact that they were circled around Nizan mean that they felt his threat to Jiao was greater than mine? Were they looking down on me? Jiao and I stood across from each other, and she looked like she wanted to say something. Then, suddenly, 2 gusts of wind brought 2 people before Jiao, Muscle Man and Bandages. My heart wailed in anguish. 6 against 2? No way we could win. But aside from a quick glance over, neither Muscle Man nor Bandages seemed at all concerned with me. Instead, they hastily reported to Jiao.
Commander, 4 of the 7 B-rank officers have been assassinated. They're dead inside of their rooms.
4 of 7 B-rank officers were killed? From what I know, B-rank officers in S-Clan had mental force around 35 to 40, who could possibly kill off 4 of them. And since Muscle Man and Bandages were making this report, they must have been at least B-rank officers as well.
What about the other 3?
Jiao didn't sound panicked though. In fact, she didn't have much of a reaction at all.
The other 3 B-rank officers have yet to return from the Southern District. We were able to call them, and they're safe for now.
Okay, so Muscle Man and Bandages must be 2 of the A-rank officers then. Suddenly, Bandages' eyes swept over me.
Commander, the Western Commander came to see you today, so I'm afraid that she can't be cleared from suspicion.
I immediately retorted, "Don't make blind allegations. You're suspecting that I'm related to those deaths?"
Your visitation today was the only thing out of the ordinary. Who else would be able to kill 4 B-rank officers?
Bandages glared at me with hostility.
Let's not make hasty conclusion,
Jiao said, and then, she slowly turned her head towards the 3 white-clothed people behind Nizan.
Find out who did this. And whoever it was, make sure they disappear from the split zone.
After hearing her order, the 3 white-robed figures vanished from my sight with a whoosh. Even though Jiao didn't seem to express any reaction to the death of 4 higher-ranking officers, she must have felt angry and hurt. I may not understand her, but I do know one thing, that she had never before ordered the white robes to leave her side. Suddenly, a strange feeling slipped into my heart. I felt a sense of sadness from out of nowhere. I raised my head and looked at Jiao. She was looking right back at me,